So I'm just having another quick look around the board here before I do any more, just to get a bit more of an idea again. You can see all the residue that's collected under some of these parts here, and some of this seems to be kind of rust, like a dust made out of rust. There's quite a bit down here as well where stuff's collected, and this is blue as well, so I want to try and get a bit of vinegar on that, see if I can stop that getting any worse. And just even between some of these components here, there's just a build-up of muck, so again I'll get the brush on that. A bit of rust on this can here for this for the oscillator, just a tiny bit of surface rust really on there. Hopefully that will come away. It's only a little bit. Hopefully the legs are okay on that one, unlike they were with the other one. You'll see here there's just sort of as if something's gone on here, and then this sort of residue's built up. So I think some liquid or water or something's got in here, ran down the board, and then the muck and crust has collected on that over time. And this shows on the inside of the casing and the metal shielding as well. I think I pointed this out. These chips have got quite a bit of crust collected along these legs here and along here, so I need to try and flush as much of that away as I can. Otherwise it doesn't seem too bad. The rest of the board seems pretty much okay. There's nothing major I've spotted. That doesn't mean there aren't more issues hiding somewhere, but... And then there's also this crust on some of these capacitors. Now I'm still not entirely convinced this is leakage from the capacitors. I'm not saying the capacitors haven't leaked or that they don't need replacing, because they do, and I've got a cap kit to replace them with. But I think this is some kind of aluminium oxide. I think it's just basically aluminium rust from the cans, because this has been stored in sort of damp conditions, I think. Over here where we've got this card slot, there's some damage to some of the traces here, so there's clearly it's got into the board a little bit there. Some of the traces around here have got little black spots, so they could need looking at, so they might have to be scratched away a little bit, and just a bit of solder to tin them to protect them. But there's not really a massive amount of notable problems. And again, I'll see if I can catch the light here. Very difficult to do this, but again, because this has been stored, I think, sort of almost at a diagonal position, there's like a residue here of something that's ran down here. So again, I think some water or something, and that's probably collected on this card slot a bit as well, which is probably why some of these legs are green. This is going to need a real good scrub up as well, as best I can. This little chip here is the RGB encoder that I was talking about earlier, that gets fed the signal from this oscillator that's missing, and that's sort of generates the composite signal from the RGB signal. The underside, no real problems. There's just this horrible sticky flux residue everywhere now to get rid of. There's no notable major problems other than this mess down here where this burn damage has taken place from these resistors. But we'll give it a clean up and see what we're at. So I'd like to try and cover these stickers up with some tape so that they don't get sort of lifted off, because the vinegar and the IPA will probably attack the glue on those and remove them. So what I'm going to do first is just clean up around that area with a little bit of IPA and some cotton buds, and then I'll mask that off with some tape just in that area. So it's not too bad. I mean, it's dirty, but it's not terrible. But I think some of these other areas of the board, it's going to show a lot more up. I think these are actually plasticky labels, so they might not. No, these are plastic, so they won't lift. These may though, because they are paper. I didn't realise these were plastic. They look papery. Around here there's definitely a residue. The board looks darker and it's dirtier. It's much darker on the cotton bud. So yeah, I'm just going to cover over here with a bit of insulation tape because that's not going to stick to the, it's not very sticky, this insulation tape, it's a bit old. And then I'm going to go over that with something a bit stronger. And I'll probably have to clean the glue residue of this tape off the board then. Okay, so I'm back on with the main board again here. I've taped this area off as best I can, and I've put this in this tub again because this helps stop the brush from flicking all the liquids everywhere. And because this is plastic and it's likely to sort of generate static, I've put some aluminium foil across the bottom, up the side, and then grounded that just to help get rid of any static charge that might build up. And I'm using the modified toothbrush head that I made previously because this is an anti-static brush. And what I'm going to try and do is just generally go over the whole board where I feel it needs it, which is probably going to be everywhere, to be honest, and sort of try and work the dirt off to the edges. This chip here, well, all the chips on these edges, the sort of these back, well, I guess it'd be back right edges, all seem to have collected the dirt because I think this was stored sort of this way up, probably that corner pointing downwards, which is why stuff's collected here. And probably also one of the reasons that the card slot connector's actually not really got much muck in it at all, although there is a little bit of corrosion in there, which is something else that will need addressing. What I may actually do with this, because it does seem that that's just one solid piece of plastic, is actually fill this with vinegar and leave it on end just to soak, probably overnight, and get rid of any of the corrosion there. And then I can again go over with this brush because this has got quite long bristles. I should be able to get these bristles down into here deep enough to clean those pins up a bit. I'm not sure about cleaning them with the metal polish. I mean, it would probably be a good idea, but I'm probably going to have to use the long bristle brush to do that, and obviously you don't want the static build up, so it's then going to be quite difficult to clean that out. So not sure how far I'm going to go with that. It may be that I don't even use it, but it would be nice to try and clean it up as best as possible. Going to lay this flat because it's moving around a bit more than I was anticipating. I wanted to keep it at an angle for this chip down here, particularly because there was a lot of junk collected along that edge, and I didn't want it to sort of wash underneath that chip if I could avoid it. The best thing with this seems to be just to hold the bristles gently onto the board rather than trying to press hard. If you press hard, you just stop the bristles moving, so the cleaning action doesn't work. And as you can see, this creates lots of little bubbles, and that helps clean everything up. And there was quite a lot of muck around this area. I could see on the previous look at this, it all ran down at an angle, so there's obviously some moisture or something in here. And again, you may be able to see the bubbles that are building up there. And this bit here is certainly one of the worst areas of this board, so I've put plenty of vinegar down on here. And this is a good example where this brush is really handy because you can get between these pins on this connector. Unfortunately the battery's gone flat on the toothbrush. This is one of the issues with that setup. That's why I want to have a go at making something a little better rather than just using the brush as it is. I'm just using the vinegar at the minute now just to rinse this down, and there's loads of debris that's collecting on the foil. You probably can't see it on the camera, but it's sort of like more of this black soily looking grit stuff. So the PC card slot up, you can't really see that very well because of the light, unfortunately. The foil's throwing the camera out a bit with its brightness settings. So just working the vinegar around in the contacts in there. Some of them did look a little bit green, but to be fair they do actually look very shiny on the ends from here, so I think perhaps scrubbing them up more would be unnecessary. It may cause me more problems because it's very difficult to clean in there. I'll also give the back a bit of a wipe down. There's a label there I've missed, but don't worry about that one too much. So this is cleaned up quite nicely. I don't think there's too much of a problem in this connector, so I should just leave that as it is. Even manual brushing is still useful because you can't always get in with the amount of pressure you need. Alright, so I'm going to give this a blast with a compressor again to try and get rid of most of the vinegar, and also it helps blast it from underneath the chips because it gets stuck under there. Even if you've dried a board with a hairdryer and it looks dry, I found if you then blast it with the air compressor you'll get quite a lot of wet come out from under the chips. So this is dried up now. It's definitely looking a lot better than it was. There's still some blue around here which I think I'll have a go at with the fiberglass pencil, sort of the bluey green copper colour you get from this corrosion. There's areas on the board where there's rust and residue that I'll try and get rid of. There's some areas down here that might need attention. And where I was desoldering these, the flux is, most of it seems to have come off, but there's some areas that are really quite sticky, and particularly on the back here where obviously I've put most of the flux. So I'm going to try and clean them up with some IPA and a cotton bud first, and then I'm going to try and give the whole thing a rinse over with IPA anyway, just to get rid of any contaminants or any of the vinegar that may have dried on it. You can see the build up there. And this area down here where these resistors have burnt out is not very good. I'm a bit annoyed that the pad came off, but to be honest, looking at the heat that's gone into the board, I don't think there's too much I would have been able to do. It's really been frazzled up, that one has. And this is from when I removed the modulator. I did notice that these holes I was saying were handy as little places to poke through to push the modulator out when I was desoldering it. They're actually for other connecting points, so it looks like there's different types of modulator that perhaps could have been used on this system. So I think that's why it's been done like that, and there's also additional connection points there. So it's still feeling quite sticky, this is. Whether that was, it's actually my fingers. I've got the flux on my fingers, so it feels like the board's sticky, but it's actually just my fingers. That's not sticky now. And then we've got these joystick ports down here to do. Surprising just how much comes off of these. You think they're clean and then you do it again and there's more comes off. So most of those residues that I could see had run on the board when I was tilting it in the light, that's gone. I think pretty much all of it. Can't see any of that. So it's definitely cleaned that off. What I'm going to do is just give the board a little bit of a spray down with some IPA and just a wafting over with the brush, just to try and, if there's any other muck on there, that should hopefully come away, and then we'll see where we're at. So I've set up the box again with the foil. This is not really ideal. I'm going to have to think of a better way of doing this, but for the time being this will work well enough. So I particularly want to blast underneath these chips, because that's where there's any sort of deposits likely to have collected. So this will help get rid of that. And even now I can still see there's little bits of like grit and stuff on the collecting on the foil. It makes you wonder if you can ever truly get a board clean. So that's starting to lift that bit of tape now. So okay, so I'm just going to scrub up these port areas now where the soldering was done. Do a bath of the IPA in here, so I'm going to have to get rid of this because it's getting a bit stinky in here. So I'll just leave that now on one side to dry out, and then I'll give it a go over with the hairdryer on a gentle heat setting. Just get rid of this IPA that's in here.